Have you ever wondered what happens when a true living legend, a name that shaped the history of world sport, simply disappears from the spotlight, without a trace? When someone who seemed invincible, who dominated the track as if he were born to win, disappears, and no one really knows what happened to him anymore? Michael Schumacher was not just a driver, he was the very epitome of excellence, a phenomenon who did not drive, he commanded. With 7 world titles, epic victories, and surgical coolness at over 300 km/h, he made the impossible seem routine. And those who saw it know. Every time he lined up on the grid, the world held its breath, because any curve could go down in history. But what almost no one expected was that the most devastating moment of Schumacher's life would not happen on a wet track, nor after a fatal error in Monaco or Suzuka. What destroyed everything came silently, in an unlikely scenario where his overalls and helmet had been left aside. Far from the cameras, the glory, and the speed, he would face the biggest crash of his existence. What you are about to see goes beyond any race. This is a true story, and at the same time, an unbelievable one. A story of absolute glory, followed by a frightening silence. Of worldwide idolatry, and of a disappearance that has become an enigma, to this day without a clear answer. Stay with me, because what is about to be revealed may change the way you see not only Schumacher, but also what happens to those who, even though untouchable, are hit by the unexpected. After all, how is it possible that an above-average man who defied time and physics was knocked off the track? How did someone who seemed eternal become absent and at the same time a constant presence in the imagination of millions? This story cannot be told in numbers. It can be felt. It touches people where no camera has reached, where not even the biggest fans have been able to enter. Because when we talk about Michael Schumacher, we are not just talking about Formula One. We are talking about something bigger, a human being who was treated as superhuman, and who, precisely because of that, caused a deep and collective wound when he disappeared. And if you are here now, still listening, still feeling, it is because this story belongs to you too. Maybe you remember where you were when it all happened. Maybe you felt the world stop at that moment. Or maybe, like many, you still ask yourself, how is he today? So comment below. What was the image that never left your head when the name Michael Schumacher was mentioned? Was it an overtaking maneuver, an interview, a red flag, or simply the sound of that engine screaming victory? These comments aren't just responses, they help keep the conversation alive, creating a real community around something that connects us all, the passion for Formula One and the stories it holds. And if you're enjoying this type of content, leave your like. It seems like a small thing, but it shows YouTube that it's worth sharing this video with more people who, like you, are also moved by the story behind the helmet. It is clear. Subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning. There is still much more history to tell, many emotions to relive, and many races to analyze, even those that happened off the track. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow, reach more people, and continue to bring content made with truth, serious research, and a lot of passion. Now, if you've already felt the weight and beauty of this journey, just wait until you see what happened when Schumacher's life took an unpredictable turn, and the world realized that behind the 7-time champion, there was a vulnerable man, fighting against something much bigger than any race. After achieving everything possible in Formula One, Michael Schumacher decided to slow down, not in sports, but in life. For the first time in decades, he could wake up without the pressure of the clock, without the pressure to perform, without the deafening noise of high-revving engines. It was as if the man behind the helmet finally had room to breathe. And that's exactly what he did. Away from the cameras and the packed grandstands, Schumacher began to build a new identity. No longer as the invincible 7-time world champion, but as a father, husband, and nature lover. He swapped the paddocks for the Alps, the hairpin bends of Monaco for the mountain trails, and his helmet for a ski suit. It was a silent but powerful transformation. A new chapter where time was not measured in laps but in simple moments with family. This transitional phase was marked by a change in mindset. It was no longer about overtaking rivals, but about enjoying the present, something rare for someone, who spent so much time planning for the future, season after season, and perhaps it was precisely during this calm that he reconnected most with himself. Schumacher found pleasure in challenges that didn't involve trophies, climbing, sailing, riding dirt bikes, adventures that kept the body moving but the spirit at peace. The most curious thing is how everything seemed to be in harmony. His few public appearances showed a serene man with a genuine smile, surrounded by those who really mattered. Behind the scenes, close friends reported that he was happy, fulfilled, almost unreachable in terms of emotional balance. The pressure of the pits was a thing of the past, and yet there was still a flame burning, the competitive spirit, the sparkle in his eyes that never completely goes out in a true driver. This more intimate version of Schumacher was rarely seen by the media. His private life became shielded, protected with the same precision with which he drove on wet tracks. It was as if he had found the hidden truth of freedom, not being the center of attention, but being whole where it really matters. The decision to step away from the spotlight seemed clear, conscious. A choice made by someone who knew what he wanted, and who, after so much time dominating the world of speed, wanted only the comfortable silence of home. And it was in this scenario, in this almost poetic balance between a glorious past and a peaceful present, that everything changed. Without any sign, without any prior warning, an unexpected moment completely changed the course of this journey. It wasn't in a race, it wasn't in front of the cameras. It was on a ski slope, with his son by his side, in a place where he had been so many times before. A place of leisure, of rest, and ironically, of impact. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened next exposed a vulnerability that many had tried to forget, and revealed a side of Schumacher that no one was prepared to see. Comment here, a new beginning. It was December 29th, 2013. An ordinary day for many, but for the Schumacher family, it was another quiet chapter in their new life away from the racetrack. Michael was with his son Mick in Maribel in the French Alps, one of his favorite places, to relax, unwind, and feel the freedom of the snow underfoot. He knew those mountains like he knew the curves of Spa-Francorchamps. They were safe, familiar. And perhaps that's why nothing that morning seemed out of place. Until everything changed. The impact was sharp, brutal, unexpected. In a split second, the scene changed completely. Schumacher slipped and hit his head on a rock covered in soft snow off the main track. It wasn't a risky jump, nor a daring maneuver. It was a simple descent, something he had done dozens of times before. But that day, at that exact moment, something changed, and it changed everything. The irony is almost unbearable. A man who spent decades driving cars at over 300 km/h, defying death at every turn, facing rain, fire, spectacular crashes, and still coming out of it in one piece, found himself on the brink of death in an absolutely ordinary situation. He had overcome the greatest dangers of Formula One, but he was not prepared, neither he nor anyone else, for the fragility of a moment off the track. It was as if the universe decided to remind him that even giants have limits. The news spread with frightening speed. First came the rumors. Then came the cold, cutting confirmation, like a punch in the stomach. Michael Schumacher had suffered a serious head injury. He was taken by helicopter in critical condition to the hospital in Grenoble. He was put into an induced coma. And, from that moment on, time began to be counted differently. Minutes turned into days, days turned into weeks, and the world stopped. The fans stopped. The former teammates stopped. The journalists, the teams, the doctors stopped. It was as if, for a moment, no one could continue until they understood what was happening. The future races, the ongoing championships, the records at stake didn't matter. All of that paled in comparison to what was really at stake. The life of a man who had inspired generations. And it was at that moment that a hidden truth was revealed, often ignored in the glitter of achievements. The vulnerability of the hero. The one who had always been seen as unshakable, cold, calculating, capable of facing any situation on the track with almost superhuman precision, was now fighting for something as basic and essential as breathing, as waking up. It was the cruelest battle of his journey. And there were no cameras recording it, no crowd applauding. It was just him, his family, and a medical team attempting the impossible. This accident exposed much more than just a risk. It brought to light the fragility of life, the importance of the decisions we make every day, even those that seem harmless. It showed that no matter how strong, successful, or prepared someone is, life remains unpredictable, and that sometimes it is precisely in the most banal moments that it changes completely. The press, thirsty for information, surrounded the hospital, but the Schumacher family acted quickly. They surrounded themselves with silence, asked for respect, and created a barrier. And from that moment on, one of the most mysterious and protected periods in the history of sports began. Nothing was released without extreme care. Information began to be filtered, rare, almost non-existent. The world wanted answers, wanted images, wanted certainties. But what they got was the opposite. Silence. And in this silence, doubts, speculations, unconfirmed versions, stories created behind the scenes that no one could prove arose. The lack of news became food for collective anxiety, but it also became protection for a man who always valued privacy, and who now, more than ever, needed peace. Still, something became very clear during that period. The impact of the Schumacher name goes far beyond the tracks. Because at that moment, the planet didn't just see a driver who had an accident. It saw a human symbol in a state of vulnerability. A reflection of ourselves. People who race, who win, who lose, who feel fear, who need time to get back on their feet. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what happened from that point on was not just a change in the way the world saw Schumacher. It was a transformation in his own legacy, and in the choices his family had to make, to protect what was left of what made him great. If you've made it this far, comment here. Nobody expected. Since that freezing day in the French Alps, Michael Schumacher's life has entered a new dimension, one that almost no one else has access to. What was once the stage is now the backstage. What was once the headlines has become silence. A thick silence full of weight and meaning. And perhaps never in the history of sport has an absence said as much as this one. When the world understood the gravity of the accident, it expected a continuous flow of updates. Medical bulletins, images, statements. But what came was the opposite. The Schumacher family, led firmly by Corinna, his wife, built a wall around Michael's privacy. A difficult choice, but deeply human. And in that gesture, it revealed a new form of love. Protecting someone's dignity, even when all eyes demand to see more. This silence has become part of the narrative. And it resonates. It resonates in every tribute paid in the paddocks, in every message of support from fans, in every driver who mentions Schumacher's name with reverence. It is a kind of silence that is not empty, it is full of presence. A silence that carries history, pain, longing, but also respect. And perhaps that is precisely what makes it so powerful. The lack of official information over the years has given way to something inevitable. Theories. There have been rumors of miraculous improvements, rumors of relapses, speculations about the current state of his health. But none of these versions have been confirmed. The family has remained firm, discreet, unwavering, and as much as this frustrates people's natural curiosity, it also teaches us something profound about empathy and limits. The truth is that no one outside that inner circle knows for sure how Michael is doing today. We only know that he is still recovering at home, surrounded by care, affection, and silence. A silence that, while protecting, also feeds a question that never stops pulsing. How is he now? Does he recognize his children? Does he hear the tributes? Does he smile when he hears the sounds of the engines he loved so much? These questions are inevitable, and it's okay that they exist. They are part of the collective mourning process that, even without a formal farewell, has been taking place since the accident. Because the image of Schumacher as active, smiling, vibrant, that was frozen in time. And any new detail, no matter how small, is like a drop of hope in a desert of uncertainty. But there is something even more delicate behind all this: the way Michael's absence affected the Formula One environment. His name is no longer just a reminder of achievements. It has become a symbol of strength, mystery, and a profound transformation in the way we view idols. The public figure has given way to the human being. And in this process, many people have seen themselves reflected there, not in the absolute champion, but in the vulnerable man who needs time, space, and privacy to keep fighting. It's interesting how time changes perspective. In the first few years after the accident, many expected a full recovery. There was the almost naive hope that he would return to events, give interviews, perhaps even commentate on races. But as the years went by, this expectation gave way to another kind of feeling: acceptance. Not in the sense of giving up, but of respect. Respect for the family's decision. Respect for the invisible struggle that goes on day after day, away from the cameras. And that is where one of the great revelations of this story lies. What is most striking is not Michael's absence, it is how much his presence still reverberates, even without words, even without images. There is a silent force that continues to inspire, something that does not depend on public appearances or weekly updates. Because the true impact of someone is not in how often they appear, but in the intensity with which they have marked people's lives. Throughout this journey, we learned much more than just details about the accident. We learned about dignity, about the limits of exposure, about how love sometimes expresses itself precisely in not sharing everything, and about how life is full of hidden truths, some that will never be explained, only felt. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because the way Schumacher's legacy has lived on, even in the midst of silence, reveals something powerful about memory, identity, and continuity. Especially when we see his name being carried, with pride and responsibility, by someone very close to home. Comment here, the echoing silence. Time passed, cars changed, engines became quieter, and Formula One continued to move at high speed. But even with all the technological changes and the arrival of new names on the grid, there is one surname that has never left the collective imagination of fans: Schumacher. There is something almost mythical about the way this name resonates. It carries a weight, a history, an aura that transcends numbers and titles. Because Michael's legacy was never limited to his records alone. It lives on in the way he drove, the way he saw the world, and the way he touched the lives of millions on and off the track. It's curious to see how, even in absolute silence, Schumacher is still present. It's in the emotional gaze of a fan holding a red Ferrari cap. It's in the trembling voice of a commentator as he recalls his overtaking moves in impossible conditions. It's in the discreet but meaningful tributes paid by drivers like Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, and Fernando Alonso, all of whom, in some way, are touched by the grand shadow he casts to this day. But perhaps the most moving reflection of this legacy is in his son, Mick Schumacher. From his first steps in the youth ranks, Mick carried not only the surname, but the expectation, the curiosity, and the symbolic weight of being Michael's son. A responsibility that few on the planet could bear with such dignity. He did not try to imitate his father. He tried to honor him, and that made all the difference. Mick grew up in the silence of absence, but surrounded by the memories of a giant figure. He learned to drive knowing that each lap of his was compared to 1,000 laps of his father, and yet he kept going. With a calm demeanor, visible dedication, and a rare humility in a sport accustomed to inflated egos. Each point he won was celebrated as a nod to the past. As if for a brief moment, the world saw a spark of Michael there. Not in his driving style, but in his essence, in his fighting spirit. Formula One, for its part, has never forgotten. Over the years, there has been no shortage of symbolic gestures. Helmets with designs inspired by Michael, numbers removed in his honor, cars decorated with messages of strength, minutes of silence in the pits, images projected in official tributes. But perhaps the most impactful is not in the grand gestures, it is in the details, in how mechanics talk about him, in how engineers still use his data as a reference today, in how young drivers say they started dreaming about racing after seeing a magical lap of his at Interlagos or Spa. Schumacher's impact goes beyond technique. He redefined the mindset within F1. He brought a new form of professionalism, discipline, physical and emotional preparation. He transformed the role of the modern driver. Before him, genius was enough. After him, it became clear that genius needed to be accompanied by an obsession for detail, absolute focus, and an unquestionable work ethic. He was a game changer, and that is something no one can erase. The hidden truth behind so many achievements is that, more than talent, Michael had an almost frightening determination. He didn't just drive, he studied, he analyzed. He went back to the garage, talked to the engineers, discussed solutions, proposed changes. His mastery didn't come just from instinct, it came from total dedication. And that marked an entire generation. Today, even drivers who never raced with him personally cite his influence as something that shaped their paths. This invisible legacy is what keeps his name alive. Because deep down, every Formula One fan who saw Schumacher race has a specific scene in their memory. It could be that comeback race in Barcelona, the last lap at the Hungaroring, or the legendary 2004 season. It doesn't matter what the memory is. What matters is that it remains, engraved, untouchable, like an emotional tattoo. And that says a lot about the kind of mark he left. It's not a media mark. It's not about being in the news. It's about being part of people's lives at moments that mattered. It's about being company on Sunday mornings, teaching people about overcoming obstacles and awakening deep emotions. And no one can take that away. Even without saying a single word in recent years, Michael Schumacher continues to inspire. He continues to be a topic of conversation, study, and emotion. He continues to be a reference, not only as an athlete, but as a symbol of excellence, dedication, and passion. His name still opens doors. He still makes crowds cheer. He still brings tears to his eyes. And that in itself is already great. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we talk about legacy, we are not just remembering what was done. We are looking at what is still alive, at what continues to transform, and at the way in which, even in silence, some presences never cease to echo. Comment here. The legacy remains. If you've made it this far, you may be feeling the same way many people feel when they finish revisiting Michael Schumacher's story. An inner silence full of meaning. Not an empty silence, but one of those that appear when we come across something truly great. Something that moves us inside. Because this story is not just about speed or records, it's about humanity, about time, about transformation. Schumacher's presence still looms over Formula One like a shadow that doesn't scare, but rather welcomes. A presence that, even when absent, inspires. And when we look carefully, we realize that it goes beyond the tracks, beyond the numbers, beyond old interviews. It's in the way he faced each challenge. It's in the mentality he built, in the impact he had on people, in the silence he chose to cultivate when everything turned upside down. This kind of legacy is not measured in trophies. It is measured in the emotional memory it leaves, in how many lives it touched, in how many people it awakened, in how many journeys it inspired. And perhaps that is why talking about Schumacher is also talking about us. Because in some way, each of us carries a bit of our own story of overcoming. Each of us has a difficult curve to face, a complicated circuit, a team in crisis, a bad start. And it is at this point that his story stops being about him and starts being about all of us. You realize this when you realize that even in a coma, even without making public appearances, even without saying anything for years, he's still here. Present in the eyes of a fan who gets emotional just hearing his name. Present in the words of a pilot who considers him as a reference, even though he has never shared the track with him. Present in the decisions of the family that chose to protect the essence of the man, even knowing that the whole world wanted to see the hero. This video was made with care, research, and respect. Because this story couldn't be treated as just another one. It carries something that you don't see every day, depth. And if you felt that, if at some point in the narrative you stopped and thought, wow, this touched me, then it was worth telling. It was worth every word, every pause, every silence. And now, at the end of this journey, I want to extend an invitation to you that goes beyond any click. It is an invitation to continue building this community with us. A space where stories are told not just to entertain, but to generate identification, where we don't run for the sake of running, but because we believe that there is meaning in every curve, in every obstacle, in every pit stop in life. If this message found a place within you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." It's simple, but it's powerful, because it shows that you didn't just watch, you were present. And it's that presence that makes all of this have real value. Take advantage of this opportunity to like the video, because this gesture, although it may seem small, helps a lot to bring this type of content to life. It makes it reach more people, who, like you, may need to hear a story like this on a difficult day, in a turbulent time, or just to remember that there are still narratives that truly touch people. And if that content gave you something, an emotion, a memory, a new perspective, subscribe to the channel, not as a favor to me, but as a gesture of commitment to yourself. Because from now on, this space will continue to bring stories that matter, stories that don't pass quickly, that stay. And to continue in this same vibe, there is a video here that complements all of this. It's another one of those stories that don't end when the video ends. Click and continue with me there. Because the journey, just like Schumacher's, doesn't end with a title. She follows. Reinvent yourself. And it transforms. Those who are willing to continue living intensely, even during the longest pauses,